Welcome back to Relatable Wisdom, the podcast where everyday people share the quotes that shaped how they see life, offering you daily doses of perspective and clarity to navigate your own journey. Today's guest is Bernice McDonald, a business strategy coach and author who's made it a mission to help women leaders transform from feeling not enough to being brave enough. She's built her work around something beautiful, the idea that courage isn't about fearlessness, but about taking tiny brave steps while still being afraid. Let's step into Bernice's world and discover the wisdom that guides her forward. Tell us your name and what you do, Bernice.
I am Bernice McDonald. I am what I call a Tiny Brave Steps coach. I coach midlife women mostly to live with courage, to walk from not enough to brave enough, because they face a lot of hard things. And many of the women I work with are also leaders in businesses. So can be a tough road. So I help them to do that, to move from not enough to brave enough with tiny brave steps.
Wow, I like that name. I feel like you just created your own category. Yeah, so yeah, the tiny brave step lady. Okay, thank you for accepting my invitation to be on the podcast, Bernice.
It's wonderful to be here. As I just said, I have been watching your episodes and been so inspired by many of the guests on your podcast.
I've been seeing the views go up, and I was like, who's this person watching my videos? I didn't know it was you. Now I've got.
It was me.
Thank you so much. Like I got this dopamine hit that ooh, someone's watching my stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I felt really good for a moment. Wow, thank you.
I know.
Okay, what's your favorite quote, Bernice?
My favorite quote for many years is one by Redmond, by
Anthony.
Ambrose
Okay, Ambrose. Yeah.
Redmond. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he actually didn't have very many famous quotes. He was an activist back in, I think, the 60s or so. But he said, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something is more important than the fear.
Ooh, let us sink in. Let us sink in. I need to take it in. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the judgment that something else is more. It's more important than the fear.
Than the fear. Yeah. Yeah.
What is that?
It's become my life theme in so many ways, because I have been a very fearful person at certain seasons of my life. Well, all the way through, fearful as a child, fearful as a teenager, in my 20s, lots of things to be afraid of. And I came to the place where I realized that, hey, fear is normal. We have a built-in protection system called fear that keeps us from falling off cliffs or being eaten by a bear. So that's good. But unfortunately, fear doesn't always know the difference between your life being threatened and you needing to do something that you're uncomfortable about to grow. So that's where I started to really think about it. Sometimes you can feel the fear, but doing the thing you're afraid of becomes very important because it's a big step in your life or a small step, and you need to do it in order to grow, to get deeper, to be wiser.
Wow. Okay. It's amazing what happens, because recently I've been having conversations and I've been having realizations that the people the soldiers, right? Who are in the front lines, who fight, and I've been having these realizations that I'm trying to imagine, like, I don't think that there will ever be a time where they're fighting where they don't feel that they could, like, any moment, and yet they show up, and I was like, okay, it's side by side. It's more like it's there, but you're like, oh no, I mean, yeah, it's nice, but something else. And now you're here and you're sharing this exact quote word for word. And I'm like, wow, what are the chances? What are the odds?
It really, I think a lot about that too, about people in war. In fact, what I encourage people to do and what I have had to do myself, because I actually probably don't teach anything that I have not experienced myself.
Okay.
So often I say that inner warrior in you, because when you think of a warrior or a soldier, like you're talking about, somebody that's actually in battle, why are they there? They're there to win the freedom for their country. They're standing against something that they believe is a threat, and so they feel that fear, and I mean, the fear could make them turn and run, right? If they have to make a decision and they say, no, I'm afraid, but I believe that we need to have this freedom. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take the steps and I'm going to do what I'm told to do what I'm trained to do, and be that person, because the end result could be absolutely life changing and so important.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I want us to, like, give an example of day-to-day things that we're afraid of. And let's
yeah,
say, okay, I'll give an example of something that I understand, and that is, a lot of persons, they want to start a podcast, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's something they want to do. It's not like, oh, you know how you say no to so many things because you don't want to do it, not because you're afraid, right? It's just not your thing, right? That's a
yeah,
different scenario. This one is, they tell you that they want to start a podcast, and then you ask them, okay, 6 months in, you're like, okay, yeah, my friend, yeah, you did tell me you're starting a podcast. How's the podcast going? Well, actually, you see, I'm working on a studio. I'm trying to get this, and I'm like, really?
I know. Yeah, and why do you think that is? Like, what is at the bottom of their hesitation, do you think?
I feel like society and the world and quote unquote what people would say and all that has been internalized into their head, that now what happens is that there's a simulation of the task itself. Okay, I'll take it slow. Say I start a podcast, right? And if I do start a podcast, people would laugh at me. People would say my podcast is trash. It doesn't sound well. It doesn't make sense, right? That is, I have started a
Yeah,
podcast. But for some reason, that voice has already been internalized in our head, that before we even start the
yeah,
podcast, we simulate that happening and the people telling us those things right in our head. And so we don't
yeah.
start the podcast.
You hit on a very good point, because this is exactly what we have to get around. We have to know that, like as I said, fear is a protector, right? So it will always pipe up like that voice in your head that says, oh, but what if people laugh at you? Or what if you don't come up with anything that anybody wants to listen to?
Yeah.
you know, all those things, because that's that protection mechanism that's built into us to keep us from being hurt. And that applies even emotionally, like to keep you, like, say, relationships. You don't want to date that girl, or you don't want to ask that girl out because she might reject you and you would get hurt. So your fear is always going to try to bring you in and hold you back. But if you're ever going to grow, like what happens to, and you probably know so many people like this, because I do. They never get beyond that wall of fear. They listen to the voice in their head, and so then they back off, or they put off what the scary thing is. They never take those big risks or those chances, like starting a podcast, because they're too afraid what that voice is telling them is going to happen. Unfortunately, if they would just take those small steps to start moving forward, a tiny brave step at a time, they would find out that the courage is only found in taking the steps. So the courage won't be there until they put one foot out, and then another foot, and then another foot, and they take the chance, they take the little risks, and then they build up to the bigger risks. That will never happen unless they actually get in motion.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is that true?
Yeah. It's when you just explained, it just occurred to me that when I started the podcast, scared is an understatement. I don't know why I was scared. My first few episodes, I was like,
Yeah.
well, what am I going to say? What? I was sweating. I had printed questions I printed, and sometimes in the midst of tension, the paper, something would they would just mix up, and here I am. I'm like, and I did the first one, the second one, the third one, and after a couple, even before this podcast episode, I was scared. I felt scared, and I was like, but then I remember I've done over 200 episodes, and I'm like, it's not going to go bad, because now I have the evidence. You see, the problem is that because we're scared, we don't start enough to have those evidence, and so because we don't have that evidence, we don't have the things to say. Okay, yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I have 200 episodes. It's not gonna. I know what I'm doing. Let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying this conversation and want more thought-provoking ideas straight to your inbox, join the Relatable Wisdom email list. It's free, quick, and filled with bite-sized insights inspiring quotes, and behind the scenes reflections from our guests. Just head to relatablewisdom.com/join. That is relatablewisdom.com/join, or tap the link in the show notes. And hey, subscribing to the podcast helps more than you think, and it's free. So if you haven't already, hit that follow button wherever you're listening. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Exactly. You just proved that action is the thing that grows the courage. Because even if you take, like, even if, you had made some big mistakes in the beginning, if you hadn't let that stop you and you corrected those mistakes, or you learned from those mistakes, and then you got some advice and you went forward and you did something a little more, you would still, find out that it's not so bad. Like, the things we're so afraid of can often be very small. And once you take the step and actually start doing it, you then are ready to take the next step. Like, look at you now, 200 episodes. It's time that you started doing something else that's bigger and scarier than that, right?
Yeah,
Because you have to keep yourself challenged, and you're ready to take some other big step now because
yeah.
you've mastered it in lots of
In
ways.
your quote, you mentioned something. Okay, okay, not your quote, but it's your favorite quote, even though,
Yes.
yeah, even though it's the quote by Ambrose Redmond. And one of the key things
Yeah.
he mentioned in that quote is judgment, right? The judgment. For me, would you be kind enough to show us how we can, what's the word? How we can have the judgment of something more than the fear, because the fear will always be there.
My goodness, there's been so many examples of that in my own life. And now it becomes a place where I recognize that fear voice. I actually named him Fred. I made friends with my fear.
Uh,
Because I talk to him, because he's not the boss of my life. Like, you have to kind of back up and see it as a warning system in your brain. And so when you step back, psychologically, this is proven, you step back and kind of personify your fear, or any emotion, you actually start to you see it from a distance. So one example would be, okay, I'm going to tell you what I did when about probably 15 years ago. I went through a divorce 20 years ago. And I lived in a very scary time because I really wanted to find true love. But I was scared and I kept making the same mistakes. Finally, I sort of learned what it was that made a relationship work and was ready. And so then I met the love of my life, and I had to take the steps to actually put that relationship in place. That was scary. But I learned, first of all, did what I needed to do in myself to learn to very slowly stand up for myself, know who I am, know the kind of partner I was looking for. So that was a big step. But then shortly after that, what I said to my new husband, and I'm not even sure he was my husband yet at that point. I said, I want to learn to be brave. I need to do some courageous things. And so he said, like what? And I said, well, I've always wanted to go whitewater rafting. But, I was at this point probably 50 years old. And, like around that. And, women like that just didn't jump into a whitewater raft. So he went out and booked it right away, right? So that was my first adventure. I was scared to death, but little steps, right? I got out of the car. In my mind, I left my fear in the car, beaking away because he was saying, you're going to die, you're going to die. But, I
uh,
left him there. I put on my wetsuit. I listened to the instructions. I got in the raft. I went on the ride and learned those were the actions I took that helped me to enjoy that ride. I felt so amazing at the end of that. And we did several other things like that to start to wake up my courage. Now, what I did was transfer what I learned by doing those scary things to everyday life. So I was working at the time for a boss who was hard to work for. She was pretty strong and pretty intimidating. I learned how to just stand up for myself. I felt the fear, but talking to her, I had the hard conversations. I stood up for myself and I said, I feel really small when you talk to me like that. I did things like that, which I'd never done before. And so I built a place for myself where I felt safe. I felt like I had control of my life. I could be who I am in the world and protect myself and be okay with that. So this is how it all kind of comes into play. You use your fear, you see your fear, you say, okay, I hear you, fear, but I need to do this anyway. And I'm going to be um, in fact, have you ever read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert?
Yeah, right.
Now she says in there that, and this is partly where I got this idea about making fear your friend. She said that she said to her, she actually wrote a letter to her fear and she said, Dear fear, I know you will always be with me. That's just part of life. However, and I'm going to invite you to come along for the ride, but you are always going to be in the back seat. You will never be driving. I am going to be driving the car and I will hear you, and I will consider your counsel, but I'm always the boss.
Yeah, yeah. I like that is illustration analogy, and it's really yeah. Thank you for sharing that story,
It's
Benz.
easy. Makes it easy.
Yeah,
Whenever you feel that fear, because we all do in certain situations, whether we're starting a business, whether we're having a hard conversation, whether we're even walking alone at night in a place that we're feeling a bit uncomfortable about, we still can make decisions not to let the fear overwhelm us, but instead just keep walking forward,
yeah,
taking the steps.
yeah. Why you just explain that the term just like flashed through my mind, and the term is luxury of fear. So most times we have the luxury of fear. What I mean is like certain things. I'll give an example. Let's say a road or streets, right? It's kind of scary or dangerous to walk through at night, right? For a lady to walk through at night, and while you were about to walk through, you're like, I'm scared. Now, of course, this kind of fear is the kind of fear that you should listen to, because this is not a fear for mine and stuff like that. But if a mother had a child that was like real sick, and she needs to like get the child through that's the shortest cut to get the child to the hospital. Now that like the thought will not even occur to her that, oh yeah, this place is scary and all that, because she doesn't have the luxury of, oh yeah, I should be scared and stuff like. And same thing in certain areas of our life. Sometimes what you mentioned, that there's the judgment of something more than this. And I think for me, I'm trying to think of how do we put ourselves in situations such that we have things that are more than the fear, way more than the fear, such that we don't even have that luxury of saying, okay, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm this, I'm that. Because most of the times it's because we have that luxury. Like, yeah, I'm scared. And then you relax, you sit down. But when you don't have the luxury, you do it anyway. And like, yeah, that's true. I was scared when I started. Yeah, why was I scared?
Yeah, that is a good story because that mother, because to save her child, to ensure her child is okay, would get through that darkness and would handle whatever happened in order to get her child to safety. And I think you bring up a good point. I think the question that we always have to ask ourselves is, what will happen if I don't do this?
For most people, nothing will happen. For most people, nothing really significant would happen. That's why they have the luxury of fear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And they can decide not to go forward,
exactly.
right?
And I've noticed this about people that work in companies where, oh, if I don't do this, I will get fired. And so they're like, oh yeah, they'll do it. Right? I've seen certain people who, if they're working for the company and the company say, okay, we want you to be the host for a podcast, they'll show up. They won't second guess themselves. But the moment you're like, okay, start your podcast and be the host for your own podcast. Whoa, no, 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 whoa. And I'm like, wait, but that's exactly what you just did for the company. Why didn't you second guess it? Well, you see, actually, I didn't have the liberty to second guess it, because if I did second guess it, the company, and I'm like, oh, so what's happening now?
But see, that comes right down to a personal thing too. Like that person has to decide, who do they want to be? If if creating that podcast is going to grow them as a person and actually get them, like with you, I'm sure you've seen a lot of personal growth because you had the courage to start and keep going. So the person, I think that this is a sad thing about many people in our world is that they're okay to just stay where it's safe.
Mm.
They're okay to say, well, I guess I wasn't really meant to do that, or I guess I don't really need to do that. Even though, oh, can you imagine the person that they might become if they did actually take the risks, take the steps?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
your friends who are looking at the podcast and trying to decide and putting it off and thinking that's okay. Who could they have become if they actually went with the podcast? How could they change the world? What good could they do? Who might they touch?
Yeah.
Because they did the podcast.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I've noticed that fear is a compass. It shows that we
Yes.
care about the outcome of the thing that we're doing.
Yes.
Because certain basic stuff
Yeah.
that we do, we're not afraid. Like we're not afraid about it, even though the things might go wrong. But the moment it becomes something quote unquote significant, we become scared. Well, what if this happened? Well, if this happened? Because now we're so very concerned about the outcome, and we don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true. Because I guess that's kind of like you have to have that horizon you're reaching for, right? Like you have to have that big outcome that you want. Um, Again, sadly, many people don't think that far ahead. They're just more in survival mode
Mm.
every day, and they don't think about why am I here on this earth? What are my gifts? What is my passion? How could I make a difference to change the world? And maybe they're doing that. And I don't mean to judge anybody, but and maybe they're doing that in very small ways and very beautiful ways, just in their everyday life. But I think there are so many talented people that just have decided they're not really that talented. And so then they just settle for mediocre when they could be great.
Yeah.
And to be great, you have to take the risks. You have to step past times when you're feeling that fear. you know, when I think if I had not even started being guests on podcasts, I mean, I love it because I can talk about my passion. That's a very scary thing from a guest perspective too. Like what am I going to say? What if I get asked something I don't know what to say? That's a scary thing, but I had to decide. The judgment I had to make was, is this important to my message that I want to give to people? And the answer for that was yes. And what happens if I don't do this? Well, I might find another way, but I also might miss some opportunities that are, really special out there that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for making that decision. How else would I have gotten to have this conversation with you if you didn't decide to be a podcast guest?
yeah, we never would have
Yeah.
met.
Yeah.
That's true. I have met so many wonderful people through this. I love it just because we have such good discussions
Yeah.
about these things, and I love to hear what they're thinking.
Yeah. Your book, Brave Enough. Yeah.
To be myself.
Yeah. Before the podcast, you did you spoke about it in highlights in passing, like, right. What's the book about in terms of what can the book do for my listeners?
Well, it's book one of a series of 10 books, which I'm writing. That is my big horizon I'm reaching for.
Okay.
And they're all about courage. They're called Little Books of Courage. It's a very easy book to use. I wanted a book that had a lot of white space, a lot of inspiration, just very short stories. It's from my life stories, from other people's lives. But then it actually is a 30-day journey for somebody to move from not enough to brave enough, not enough to being enough, but not enough to becoming brave enough to take the risks, to step past the fear and to do the thing that they're judging is more important than the fear. Because I just believe that every person on this entire planet has a purpose.
Yeah.
They're here for a reason. And we need to find, like, that's what makes life worth living, is to know that, hey, I'm different than any other person on this entire earth, and I need to be who I am. And so I wanted to just write something simple that people could take and really think about, how do I be myself? How do I just be brave enough to be who I am and be okay with that?
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you so much, Bernice. It's amazing how time flies. It's yeah,
yes.
it's. I'm sad that we have to end this conversation, but we, it was a great chat. What do you do, and where can my listeners learn more about you and what you do?
Well, the one thing I do want to say, I'm an author, so they can find me on Amazon. My
Okay.
second book is about to be published in the next month. But also, I want to just highlight a chat GPT thing that I actually I learned how to instigate. It's powered by Chat GPT, but it's called the Tiny Brave Steps Generator.
Okay.
And people can get it free at tinybravesteps.com. And there they can talk to it like a coach, and it will guide them through. It's programmed to ask them questions about their fear, about what they're fearing, and to help them come up with 3 little steps that they can take at the end to move them forward beyond their fear. So tinybravesteps.com. If your listeners want to try it out, that's where it is, and it's absolutely free.
Well,
So,
thank you so much for sharing that resource with us. I'll be sure to put the link in the description and the show notes so my listeners can just click and go straight to the website. Thank you so much, Bernice. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you.
and a delight chatting with you too, Wisdom. Thank you so much for everything you've given me.
You've been listening to Relatable Wisdom, and I've been your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. You've been listening to the podcast where every story, quote, and insight helps you see life a little differently. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow the show on your favorite podcast app and share it with someone who loved the conversation. For more inspiring voices and timeless wisdom, visit relatablewisdom.com. Until next time, keep living, learning, and collecting wisdom that matters most to you.